bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky France, and a great episode for you today. Dr. James Lyons-Weiler is on episode 299 of the Ripple Effect Podcast. Great episode. We go into his whole history on how he got into what eventually we end up discussing on the show, and one of the reasons I had him on the show for. And it's a study he's a part of with Dr. Paul Thomas, comparing vaxxed and unvaxxed children, and just seeing their health and the differences, and if there's any correlation with more visits and health issues and whatnot. So a very important study. But his background, Dr. James Lyons-Weiler's background, is also very important because he has a lot of experience with dealing with universities, the science, the research, big pharma. He's also been on Spiro's podcast, and he's been on Ernie Hancock's show, Declare Your Independence. Check out those two interviews. And Dr. Paul Thomas, I believe, has also been on Spiro's show. So go on YouTube. I believe you can find those. And 300th episode is next. I'm super excited. What a crazy milestone. I plan on doing the Patreon podcast on the 3rd of February, 2021, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're a Patreon supporter, I will send you the Zoom link, and you can be a part of my 300th episode. Every month, I will be doing at least one Patreon podcast. It will be a podcast with my Patreon supporters where they can connect with myself, connect with one another. But the 300th episode is going to be special because I'm going to have a bunch of guests, bunch of friends of mine that I've made throughout this whole journey of doing this podcast, have them jump in. And I honestly don't know who exactly is going to come and when they're going to exactly show up. So if you want to be a part of this whole 300th episode celebration hangout show, please join my Patreon page, and you'll get that Zoom link. So that's really fun. Rockfin. I have a new show on Rockfin I just started. It's called Ricky Rants on Rockfin, and it's a solo show. So you kind of get a little bit of everything. My Union of the Unwanted show, which I do with Sam Tripoli, Charlie Robinson, and Midnight Mike, is like a big Zoom conference call with alternative media and researchers. Then you have the Ripple Effect Podcast, which is a little bit more intimate, usually one or two guests on. And then Ricky Rants on Rockfin, which will be a solo show, and I just discuss anything and everything that comes to mind, share personal stories, philosophies, who knows, what I'm watching, what I'm listening to, what I'm learning. So it'll be fun to kind of see where that journey takes me and where that show takes me. But that is on Rockfin. I know a lot of you guys are already on Rockfin because Jimmy Dore is there, Last American Vagabond, Whitney Webb, Sam Tripoli, Truthzilla, Jason Bermas. So many of our friends are already on there. So if you are a subscriber to Rockfin, please go check out my page, rockfin.com/ripple effect. Oh, also my good friend Richard Grove, who has a great show, Grand Theft World, is on Rockfin now. He streams his show exclusively on Rockfin, so definitely go check out Rockfin. And if you subscribe to Rockfin, come check out my show. It's another way of supporting the show. I do have a PayPal account if you want to tip the show, which some of you have, and I really appreciate it. Obviously, I have Patreon. But now, if you want to support the show on Rockfin, all you have to do is subscribe to my show if you're already on Rockfin. So another great way of supporting the show. And of course, my merch store, Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com, to get hoodies, t-shirts, all that type of stuff. Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com. And then fringe.fm, a great app, alternative media, 24/7 radio. My show is now on there every Wednesday night, 7 to 9 Eastern Time. You'll find Ripple Effect Podcast on fringe.fm. Grimerica's on there. Charlie Robinson's on there. And tons of great shows and many more coming. So a really great idea. 24/7 alternative media radio station. The app is awesome. You can get it, I believe, for Android and Apple. I have an Android, so I know you can get it for Android. But you can also just go to the website, just put in fringe.fm, and you can listen to it directly from there. And also, I've been posting clips. A lot of people have been a little confused about the clips I've been posting. These clips are older shows. So what I'm doing is, because I have so many new listeners in the last couple of years, and yet I think I've done a lot of really important interviews the first couple of years that people might not be aware of, I'm going back in the archives, taking clips from shows that I want people to kind of maybe go back and check out that I think were really good, and I'm sharing little clips from those episodes. So I'm hoping I can expose some new listeners to some old shows, some oldies but goodies. So that's the idea. So when you see a little clip, it's not a new show that's coming out. And it will tell you in the description which episode it was, episode 150 or episode 75 or whatever it may be, and you can go back in the archives, look for that episode and listen to it. And finally, I think that's it. This was a 2.5 2 hour plus podcast, so a lot of information. Episode 299. The next one will be 300. Like I said, join Patreon and celebrate the 300th episode with us. Thanks again for the support, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace. Can you get into what led you to here, your whole journey?
That's a bit of a long story, but sure. So I'm a biologist by training. I fell in love with genetics as an undergraduate. I was taking the a course in I was taking a course in genetics at the same time that I was taking a course in human evolution. So it was an anthropology course. And at the time, we realized that we could, the scientists had realized anyway, that we could study human evolution by comparing DNA sequences among different species, specifically with a DNA hybridization technique that was not designed to make hybrids of animals and humans or anything, but it was a technique in the lab that you could, take a measurement. And my very first interaction was with a scientist who wrote back to me when I found a flaw in the design of their algorithm for the analysis of their data. And I was, I think, a junior undergraduate. And he admitted that there was a flaw, but he didn't think it would amount to much because no one was going to be using this technique anyway, because DNA sequencing was coming and we could just sequence DNA. We didn't have to do the hybridization step. So nevertheless, I was encouraged to kind of trust my mind and my logic and, So I went into ecology first and studied multivariate statistics there, how to analyze and interpret species patterns across the landscape. I went into evolution thereafter, how to study molecular evolution. So if you want to understand what a protein does and how it functions, study its evolution. It's much more interesting. There are many more dimensions to understanding proteins by looking at the entire evolutionary history of proteins, protein families, multigene families. About 1999, I decided I was going to go into biomedical research instead of going into a future of evolutionary biologist. I was in my postdoc years, I had my PhD in ecology, evolution, conservation biology, and I was at Penn State University, and I saw this presentation by a pathologist. The pathologist showed technology that we could measure 8,000, 4,000 genes at a time to see which genes were turned on and which genes were turned off. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was made for this, because I rushed headlong into the controversy and evolution in how do you analyze evolutionary data. Believe it or not, something as obscure as that was fundamental and key in phylogenetic analysis, because with a given data set, depending on your assumptions of the method of how you analyze the data, you can come up with a different result. So I realized very early that people would come to different and disparate conclusions and incorrect conclusions about the nature of disease and what causes disease. What's the difference between a tumor and normal tissue, let's say, on the basis of something so obscure like which clustering algorithm or which distance measure, or who decides how you're going to analyze the data. And so I decided to embark on my first faculty position, setting up a paradigm where which we could know the appropriate way to go forward with the analysis of complex data objectively. because, if you put 18 different people, 18 different computers and the same data set in 18 different rooms, you can come up with different answers. There's no doubt about it. So how do we know when you're analyzing data that what you're doing is not fooling yourself, right? And so that became key. I mean, I had already had courses in multivariate statistics, graduate courses in other kinds of statistics, study design, research study design. So I decided to put together a course in bioinformatics. I was head of a sequencing lab at University of Massachusetts at the time, set up a bioinformatics lab. We filled it with 20 students overnight. The computer science department got jealous because they thought I was impinging on their turf with all these computers. Ooh, I have computers, they might do some damage. And really, I was just a guy that wanted to teach all the students from all the departments skills that they could use so they could then help their faculty members go into bioinformatics. That's what it was all about. Nevertheless, I got recruited from UMass over to the University of Pittsburgh. They offered me to be either on what they called the dark side of campus, which was the School of Medicine, Graduate School of Public Health, or the cancer side and be in the cancer center. I chose to be in the cancer center because my mom died of breast cancer, and I wanted to make sure that research scientists could do really good research on things like, how do we know which treatment's going to work with which patient? So that's what I pitched to the university. And I basically rolled up my sleeves. I took all my graduate students and my postdoc, and we went to work. I had a postdoc, a fellow with me, and we just went to work. We rolled up our sleeves and we started analyzing data, colon cancer, lung cancer, women's cancers, breast and uterine, pancreatic cancer. We had gene expression data from tumors and normals. We had gene expression data on who responded to which therapy. And I got swept up into the Early Detection Research Network at the National Cancer Institute, specifically to study what's the best way that we can analyze these kinds of complex data. I had been at it for like a year, maybe a year and a half, and Dr. Ronald Herberman asked me specifically to see if I could do what I was doing with gene expression microarray data with mass spec proteomics data. In a mass spec proteomics, you can, with gene expression microarray data, you can take a measurement of tens of thousands, 20,000 genes at a time for hundreds of patients, very complex. With mass spec proteomics, you could get 450,000 measurements from a single drop of blood. All right, of all the up to that, with all the peptides that are in the body. So how do you make sense of that? I got into systems biology. I got into all of this, how to understand, predict downstream responses and so on. So I became pretty popular. I brought in $27.5 million collaborative funding to the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute. I was started a brand new open access research journal called Cancer Informatics, where I was the editor-in-chief, and people around campus on the so-called dark side of the campus found me. They said, hey, we're doing transplant studies with lungs. Can you help us out? We're doing diabetes studies. Can you help us out? I helped Harvard University get funded to do their a study on biomarkers for diabetes. I was having the time of my life, just cranking it. But about the 2-year mark, 3-year mark, question is, am I going to get my independent funding? I was publishing, no problem, making all my benchmarks for submitting the grants, but nobody really it was my fault. I couldn't really explain why, depending on, I would now say, which data analysis lens you look at the data, right? Language has evolved, right? Which lens you look at the data will tell you different answers. The NCI, NIH didn't really glom onto this. They had their own bioinformatics people. They thought, we've got it under control. The guy that runs the computer, he knows what they're doing, whatever. The woman who's doing whatever. So they undervalued the problem I was working on, and it didn't get funded independently in spite of trying to help and in spite of all my collaborations. At major universities, you don't get tenure unless you have independent funding. So I decided to go to the dean of the School of Medicine and say, hey, why don't I create a company off campus? And I'll hire some people. We'll call them programmer data analysts. I'll charge you guys a nominal fee, analyze your data just like I'm doing. We get a breadcrumb. I was like, totally, I don't want to own the intellectual property. I want to do hundreds of studies if I can. And he thought it was a good idea, but he thought it'd be better if I put the shop inside the university, right? So rather than have to worry about that, he gave me a budget of $650,000 a year. He gave me 4 staff members, all new computers, all new laptops, supercomputer, right? And we started cranking the numbers. We started cranking the studies. So I would sit down with the people who would come to my office. I felt like a guru on the mountain, you know, like, how do we do this genomics, proteomics data analysis, and how do we design the study? And what clinical covariates do we have to consider, and demographic variables? And they would come to me and they would say, hey, listen, let's say, give you one example. We do lung transplant, and we use hydrogen when we do, we inflate them with hydrogen. What if we use nitrogen? When you take the lungs out of an animal, do the, you know, if you use an inert gas versus something that might be more reactive. Simple study design. They wanted to know, in the lung tissue, what causes lungs to fail upon transplant. This is life-saving research, right? So if we can optimize the procedure, something simple and cool like that, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how fantastic it is. People that need lung transplants, the lungs are going to survive. They're going to reject the lungs less. And, you know, now we know that the lungs that are not doing well is because they're in a bioreactive, they're stored in the wrong way, or they're getting, you know, they're from older people, and there's immune differences between the tissues and all the rest. But so they would sit for 45 minutes and tell me about all this cool science. So I had hundreds and hundreds of people come into my office over the course of, it was supposed to last for 3 years. It lasted for 7. And they all came into my office like week after week, day after day. It was fantastic. And I would listen to these studies for 45 minutes. What have you done in the past? What do you want to know? And then I would design the study in about 15, 20 minutes. And then the tissue samples from their lab would go to the whatever lab I was like a quarterback, go to this lab for that, go to that lab for that. And then the data would come back to me and my team. We'd analyze the data. It might take a week, it might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. We'd put all the results together into a research report that had publication quality graphs and figures. And then we'd get the PIs come back. They come back to the office. They would bring their whole team. And we'd sit down and we present their science results to them. And it was my favorite part of my job is when time after time after time, the scientists would say, oh, look at that. That makes so much sense. Oh, I get that. Oh, that relates to, you know, making those connections. That was so rewarding. So we were cranking along, and the publications were going out. The grants were coming in. I'm a staff member at this point. I stepped out of tenure track, had no protection. The chancellor at the University of Pittsburgh decided, well, he was going to leave. And the guy that they hired as the new chancellor, he had his own 4 or 5, I don't know, bioinformatics people that as he was coming in. And he found our shop and what we were doing. And he thought, you know, there's not enough space in this town for the 2 of us. So we were given our pink slips. And this was in October of 2014. So there was nothing, you know, strange about it. It was just politics. It was his kingdom, and he wanted to be the king over his, you know, domain. So anyway, if you remember, 2014 is when Ebola hit. So here I am in Pittsburgh, and I've got these 2 kids in middle school about to go into high school, and I'm not going to go to Johns Hopkins University. I'm going to stay in Pittsburgh. I'm a dad, right? So I stayed with my sons and decided to write books for a while. And in the process of writing those books, I did a lot of research, a lot of interviews, you know, of people that are experts in the field, to get to the question of what's Ebola all about, where did it come from, the molecular epidemiology, the virology, the, you know, basic biology, the virus, and so on. And it's a pretty good book. I think it's a decent book. It actually was distributed at the world's first Ebola conference in France. You know, I had my publisher contact the organizers of that, and they said, yes, we want copies of this. So they handed it out for free to all the, you know, I couldn't go, but nevertheless, I became very interested in the question of how, you know, the profit motive. How does the profit motive bias science? So my second book was Cures versus Profits, and this was 2014, 2015. I started collecting stories using, you know, of course, my 7 years of experience of hardcore data analysis and research. I had been doing, you know, I guess I'd been at it for 15 years. I had 15 years of biomedical research under my belt. And I kind of knew who the winners were and the losers were in terms of, yes, these guys are doing really good science. They're objective. And I kind of knew what stories were negative. And I could have written a tell-all book, not about the University of Pittsburgh, because I wasn't supposed to talk about anything in specific in detail when you leave a place. Here's your severance package, and I shut the hell up, right? So kept my mouth shut. I didn't talk about anything bad at the University of Pittsburgh. Let's just say that. There's only a couple of instances where I ran into anything, and they were summarily taken care of by the administration. So it's not as though I'm saying anything negative about the University of Pittsburgh. But nevertheless, the question became, as I'm writing these chapters, what happens if I'm going into an area, like one of my chapters was robotic surgery and prostate cancer, right? How do we make advances in robotic surgery and prostate cancer when there's such a market right now for hands-on? That's where the money is. The protocols are fixed. There's this new, more expensive machine. How do we get through that hump, right? Or is it worth it, right? The cost-benefit analysis. So I interviewed a guy from Massachusetts. He's so funny. He sounded just like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's famous for driving around. He's a big guy, and he's got huge hands. And the fact is, he can't do that kind of surgery. He needed the robot, right? He couldn't get his hands into the cavity or whatever the hell it is. So, but the question was throughout the book, what if I run into something bad, like some big controversy? And I made a commitment to myself: no matter what you find, you're going to be an objective author, and you're going to report it. You're not out here trying to get a new job. You're not here, kissing butt, trying to make friends. Well, because the for-profit motive was clearly impeding progress in medicine, right? You have more expensive things that are less effective, that are kept because they're more profitable. And you guys can think of all the, many people can think of all the examples that they might know of. The number one people, and no, I'm not saying there's a cure for cancer and they're burying it. I'm not saying that. Okay, what I'm saying is it's difficult when the administrators have control, when the accountants have control, and the scientists are saying we really need to not use this anymore. Yeah, but everybody does it. We got to get it through regulation. The people that are doing the regulation have conflicts of interest. So,
well, there might not be a cure for cancer, but there definitely could be other alternative treatments that could be suppressed. I've had some years ago, I had Dr. Brzezinski on my show, and he has a pretty just heart-wrenching kind of story about just his whole battle with his treatment, anti-neoplastones, and just to me, it was just surreal that a treatment that has some success was being suppressed, was being the FDA was suing him. They didn't want him to patent his drug. They didn't want it FDA approved, or his treatment, I should say. And this guy was considered a medical genius until he started going head to head with the FDA. And I mean, when, like, you talked about having someone pass away of breast cancer. My mother-in-law passed away of breast cancer, so I know what that put to, the type of what that does to a family, and what it, I obviously was on the outside kind of looking in, but I saw what my wife went through, and it was wild seeing how she was a breast cancer survivor. They treated her with things and methods that actually can spark other types of cancer, like chemo and radiation. Radiation, when you're not talking about treating cancer, we assume is bad and can cause cancer, but yet we decide that that's the go-to method of killing cancer. And then surprised when somebody who was cancer-free 1 year, a couple years later, dies of cancer. And so this is, and I've had Dr. Thomas Seyfried on my show.
Sure.
And are you familiar with him? No, he's a guy who he wrote Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, a metabolic disease. And it was Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, who's a big, I've been doing keto for a long time, a big anti-sugar, anti-carb guy. I mean, obviously eat whatever you want, but I just think there's a lot of benefits into, eating in those ways. But Dr. Dominic D'Agostino told me about Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and I'm like, wow, this guy, I'm from Massachusetts. He's at Massachusetts University, and he has this research showing how, we know cancer cells use glucose as an energy source.
That's right.
It makes common sense.
That's right.
If you suppress glucose, that it's going to have some positive effect on killing or fighting cancer cells. And Dr. Thomas Seifert has like 150 peer-reviewed studies,
That's right.
and yet nobody's interested in this because, like all aspects of life, who profits?
I think any oncologist worth their salt should tell every cancer patient, drop your sugar. First thing you got to do is drop your sugar. And so you bring up diet and everything else. Listen, even as a faculty member, way before I ran the core, right? I was invited to New Jersey, the belly of the beast of big pharma, right? And Sudhir Srivastava, MD, he was the director of the Early Detection Research Network at NCI. He was supposed to give a keynote address. And I tell this story in the book, Cures versus Profits. He was supposed to give a keynote address. And I was supposed to teach pharma how to do gene expression microarrays. I mean, they had 300 people at that meeting, and they were all scientists and CEOs, and they wanted to hear from him, and they wanted to hear from me, okay? Because he recommended me as a go-to scientist, okay? I'm not plucking my feathers here. I'm just letting you know this is real. So he calls me up. I fly from Pittsburgh to New Jersey, and he calls me up. I think it's about 7 o'clock. He calls me in my hotel room, and he says, so what are you up to? I said, well, I'm getting my slides ready. He goes, can you give my keynote tomorrow? I can't make it. I'm like, you're kidding, right? See, it's just me. It's all me. Okay, fine. I'll talk to these suits, right? I'll tell them like it is. And what I did was I put, my first slide was a picture of a stadium of 50,000 people. And I said to them during the plenary, I said, 50,000 people, you're going to die from colon cancer. And then I put 10 of them up. And I said, over 10 years, 500,000 people in the United States are going to die from colon cancer. And then I said, do you know why? Because you guys can't figure out how to make money off of nutraceuticals or food that will prevent colon cancer in these families. And then I just started telling the story about uroguanilin. The uroguanilin story in colon cancer is crazy. So uroguanilin is a protein that is normally expressed in the gut, in the intestine, and it's a spiral cage. It's the coolest looking thing. You want to look it up sometime. Uroguanilin is an enteric peptide that actually causes your intestines to slough off, to leave, right? And we do it all the time, every day or so. And it's normal. And when you don't slough off, you get these crypts. And within the crypts, they can become polyps, and the polyps can become cancerous, right? And some families are more prone to it than others. And a lot of it depends on diet, obviously, because some diet will, facilitate the sloughing off of the intestinal tract normally for digestion and excretion. Well, there was a guy who came to me at the University of Pittsburgh to talk about microarrays. He wanted to know, if I feed uroguanilin to mice, what happens to the intestinal lining? What's the signature? What's the key? What's happening in changes in gene expression that causes that? And what does uroguanilin precipitate? So I helped him design a research study, but he told me the story. The story was, he was at a large pharmaceutical company, I won't say which, and he discovered by feeding a certain kind of mouse, APC min mice, they're called. These APC min mice always get colon cancer as they age. Can't stop it. It doesn't. Everybody's tried to, give them drugs and things to shut it down. And he realized that they were low on uroguanilin. I mean, their intestinal lining were low in uroguanilin because that APC min mouse was actually missing part of the chromosome that codes uroguanilin. So he knew that uroguanilin, if you ingest it, it survives digestion. It's a very robust molecule. So he decided to feed these mice uroguanilin. All of the mice survived. They all developed polyps, but none of them progressed to colon cancer. They died of other causes first, right? So here we have a natural molecule that he fed them human uroguanilin. That's how conserved this is in mammals, okay? And a natural molecule, and he said, he went to his bosses at this big pharmaceutical. He's like, listen, I've got it. Colon cancer's done. We've got this under control. And they said, no, we can't bring it forward. Why not? Well, we can't make any money. He said, oh, okay. So do you want to sign the intellectual property over to me? So they thought it was trash. So like, sure, here you go. Fine. They signed it over to him. he created a pharmaceutical company, and he established a board for his own pharmaceutical company. He's such a believer in this molecule, he left his job and created his own company, okay? After he did another study, published a study, and then he went to the board and said, we need to go for an IPO so we can get enough money, and we need some angels. And the board said no. His own pharmaceutical company said no. Said, why not? Well, we can't guarantee that we're going to make any money off of it. And in the IPO, we would be, defrauding the investors if we said that we're going to make money off of this, when anybody can make, you can make milkshakes, candy bars, you can make just a powder you put in your coffee. Doesn't matter. You prevent colon cancer with this thing. And so he went and created another pharmaceutical company. I believe that company is called Callisto. I believe that I can't remember which one it is, but he turned out that he had to make the mirror image of the molecule and patent that to try to make it marketable. So here I am, a young assistant professor. I think it was my second year, Department of Pathology at the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm in the belly of the beast with all this 300 suits or whatever, and the scientists. And I said, my last slide was the 10, and I burnt toast, right? I gave them the list of all the things that you could do that will elicit a uroguanilin response and increase uroguanilin in the gut. I said, listen, it's just food. We have all this. Why don't you guys come up with some way to do this? And so at the end of my presentation, I got this huge applause. And then one guy raised his hand for a question. He said, Dr. Lyons-Weiler, he says, the reason why we can't do it is because our lawyers won't let us. And I said, sir, do your lawyers work for you, or do you work for your lawyers? Here's the deal. Turn your lawyers into lobbyists and go down to Washington, D.C. and concoct some agreement with the federal government that for 20 years, you guys get sole proprietary profit from this. So you more than likely, just like a patent. They're looking around like, who is this guy? He's a genius, So they got really excited about it. People are throwing their business card at me. Do you want to come work for us? I'm like, I don't want to come work for you. I don't. Because when I was a graduate student, my faculty advisor on my PhD, he said, you're going to start your postdoc years, or you're going to go into, you want to start applying for postdocs. I said, postdocs, that's academic. What makes you think I wouldn't go into industry? I was just teasing with him. And he said, because if you work for a pharmaceutical company, they would have to duct tape your hands to the chair and duct tape your mouth shut, because you wouldn't put up with the bullshit that goes beyond, right? So, yeah, so you're exactly right. There are things like that. Now that story is in the book. So you see back to the book about how I got to where I am. At the last minute before the book went to press, literally the last minute, I said, something's missing. I need one more thing. I know, I'll write a chapter on vaccines. Those are a great success story. It's easy. It'll be a couple of weeks. I'll do some writing, it'll be done. Changed my life, because I had designed over 100 research studies at the University of Pittsburgh with collaborators, 4 clients, collaborators, whatever you want to call them, on the basis, and I taught research study design courses. I taught clinicians how to design in these courses. I taught them how to analyze their data in these courses. I taught people from across campus that would come to my classes that I would teach, and they were full semester classes. Maybe that's why I didn't get my independent funding. I don't care. I know I taught a lot of people about the importance of objectivity and ethics in science. That was great, right? I had a fun time. And so I looked into vaccines are safe, vaccines are effective, they save millions of lives. This is the first part of the chapter, right? Like it's just, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is too easy. There's got to be more. And then I remembered Andy Wakefield. I said, what happened to Dr. Wakefield? So I looked into Dr. Wakefield. That's when I ran into William Thompson, Brian Hooker. I read the transcript.
He's been on my show, Brian, Dr. Brian Hooker. Yeah.
Yeah. So that book has 4 major vaccine controversies covered in it. I wasn't content to write one chapter. I actually had to add an appendix as well, outlining all this crap that I found. Now, why was I upset? I was upset well, first of all, I had to take a deep breath and said, I'm going to ruin this book, because if I could have just said, I'm going to publish this book, and it would have been a much better seller. But because it had the vaccine, the truth about the state of vaccine science in it, it bombed. So far as I could tell, it bombed. So it was suppressed. And so what do I want to say? The fact is, at the University of Pittsburgh, I had designed about and executed about 100 research studies. In my last inventory before I left, I did an inventory account over 7 years. And had I done to any one of those studies what the CDC clearly does to vaccine safety science, I would have and should have lost my job. I should have been booted because they cheat. CDC cheats on their vaccine safety science. There's no nice way to put it. The thing that caught me, Ricky, was not the MMR study with the one result of the subgroup of the African American kids that Brian Hooker found and reanalyzed and published and got retracted of higher autism with on-time MMR vaccine. That was bad. But what was really bad, it's in the Brian Hooker transcripts, was when William Thompson said, every time we do any vaccine safety science, there's a committee that reads the paper before it goes to publication. And if it has anything negative about vaccines, they send it back with, this is how you need to change the wording so it doesn't sound so bad. They send it back if there's anything that looks like it's going to be a problem with vaccines before it can. So they have a sanitation committee, a science sanitation committee at the CDC, right? So this is where all these strange euphemisms like immune enhancement come from. There's this committee that sits around and thinks up words about how we're going to change the language so the American public can't figure out that we're really saying risk.
They do the same thing when they're selling wars or conflicts overseas. I mean, it's there's a older documentary called Outfoxed, and it was about some, and there's been multiple documentaries about all the mainstream news organizations, how they'll purposely not use certain words or phrase things a certain way to kind of push a narrative. I mean, they do the same thing in science, and I'm glad you're highlighting that because people don't realize that. Like, these terms sometimes are just accepted, and somebody like yourself can immediately pick out the bullshit, where the rest of us are like, yeah, that sounds like it's science, that makes sense. I mean, maybe that's just the lingo they use, you know. So that's it's a huge issue. I mean, James Corbett, who's a friend of mine, been doing my show for many years, he has a great little short documentary called The Crisis of Science, and it goes into like tons of different things, but one thing that people have to kind of realize is that we kind of consider peer review things as like the gold standard. Like, oh, this must be good science because it was peer reviewed. Well, they don't realize how many studies can't be recreated, how many fake studies have just proven that you can get shit peer reviewed even if it's not legit science. And it takes sometimes somebody like yourself who's kind of from the outside looking in. And it's funny because your story sounds kind of like Gary Taubes' story, because because Gary Taubes was like, you know, not even into nutrition at all, and they're like, hey, you want to, you know, report on some really shitty science, go check the nutrition science. He's like, that's some really poor science. And so it's amazing how many things are accepted, and we just assume somebody did the research. Like, oh, if the media is telling me like, take this vaccine or do this, or vaccines are safe or effective, then somebody's already done the work. I just have to, you know, now believe that this is the outcome of somebody doing the research and coming to the conclusion that it is safe and effective. How little do they know that even now, I mean, one thing that's mind-boggling is how everybody's talking about, go get the jab, go get the vaccine, go get the jab, go get the vaccine. Hey, everyone, the vaccine's available here. Hey, everyone, the vaccine's available there. Nobody's asking which vaccine it is, what type of vaccine it is, who's manufacturing the vaccine. Are the studies completed? What do the studies look like? Does it stop the spread of anything? Like, everybody is just brainwashed into just getting a vaccine, any vaccine. It doesn't matter which vaccine. It's just go get one. It doesn't matter if there's a homeless guy trying to sell you one on the side of the street. Just get it. If you get the jab, you're saving people. Do it. You know, it's mind-boggling.
So that's a product of very successful programming, right? So the information campaign, they call it information campaign. Other people would call it propaganda. So I want to go back to the statement that you said that this is when you said that science changes language like this. So let's distinguish between jargon, where scientists use big words, which is, you know, a habit that we have. You know, we try to, you know, talk about things like 5'10" hyperhomocystinemia, or whatever. You know, we talk about things that nobody can understand. It sounds like chipmunk chatter, right? That's to me, that's legitimate discussion about it's a super efficient way to talk, right? To converse. We can get a lot of information over a short period of time. Because if you had to actually, say things, proteins have strange names. So whatever. Let's distinguish between that and outright fraud. When you're trying to hide something like disease enhancement, and you call it immune enhancement, right? That is, to me, you're defrauding the people of the United States who paid for the research that showed disease enhancement, when you get the vaccine and then you get the virus later and then you become more sick because you primed your body. So I changed the language in my peer-reviewed publication to pathogenic priming. And if you look up hashtag pathogenic priming, it's taken off. Language, words matter. It can be reversed, right? And so, if you don't mind, I'm teaching the public how to read, review, and understand scientific studies at IPAK EDU, ipak-edu.org. And we have a guy, Bart Kay, who's teaching exactly nutrition. So it's how to critique nutrition studies. Exactly the topics of like what's wrong with observational science and vaccines, what's wrong with observational studies here. We haven't taught a vaccine course yet. I'm teaching undergraduate biology to understand the basics of what the heck it is that I'm talking about. I'm trying to get community people that can understand me, but it is not ubiquitous through science that people cheat. I think the replication crisis is real in places like psychology, nutrition, vaccine science, where it's all observational, where you don't have a true experiment. Where you have a true experiment, where you have arm A and arm B. Now people say, no, wait a minute, don't they have a placebo arm in vaccines? Yes, they do, but only for short term. They do it for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. In this case, it looks like it's a few months. Okay, it's all good. Now let's go to market. Now we're in the post-market surveillance study, right? Everybody's a human subject on this vaccine right now that's getting it right now. They're post-market surveillance. And then they're going to do a retrospective correlation study. Correlation can't prove causation. It's weak. So that's why we don't know much about nutrition, because people don't know how to do that. That's why when I was young in my career, I decided to optimize methods of data analysis so that we knew that we weren't fooling ourselves. The trick to it, Ricky, is simply to have an objective evaluation criteria that tells you, yes, you're going the right way with your data analysis, or no, you're not, and your study design plus data analysis without looking at the results. You can look at some quantitative measures like reproducibility of the result. You take your data set and you split it into two, analyze the two different data sets different ways, and the method that gives you the same results, right, is more robust. And so do that a couple, 20, 30, 40 studies. Oh, now we see that there's some methods are superior than others in terms of reproducibility. So this is pretty dry stuff, but that's how I got into it. And just because the CDC cheats on vaccines doesn't mean the vaccines cause autism. So that's why I jumped into my autism book. I said to Grace, my fiance, I said, listen, I can't, this is like a bad itch. I have to know. I read 2,000 research studies on autism. But that book is a reflection of what the research says. Now, if I did it again, I would have included the microbiota of the gut. There's nothing in the book about microbiota, but there is everything about microglia activation, chronic microglial activation in the brain. Something no autistic parent has ever told, that your kids have your microglia in the brain are the cells in your brain that are responsible for cleaning up cellular debris if you get a viral infection or an injury, right? They're also responsible for making connections between neurons while you're learning. So they're responsible for pruning, and they're responsible for holding hands and making connections. And if those are so busy during brain development with metals that are in the brain causing cellular death at a very, very young age, and now we know with the study with Paul Thomas's data, it looks like these kids might have high rates of anemia.
And let's not confuse them, because the one thing I know that some people who aren't as familiar with this stuff as we are, Dr. William Thompson and Dr. Paul Thompson, they're two different people. Both stories are important, but they are two different people. Dr. William Thompson is the one linked to Dr. Brian Hooker is a CDC whistleblower story, in which they documented the Vaxxed documentary with Del Bigtree.
It's actually Dr. Paul Thomas. So we have Thompson and Thomas.
Right, Thomas. Sorry, now I'm mixing them up.
I may have said Thompson. I don't know,
Yeah.
but the point is, Paul Thomas's practice out in Oregon, in our Vaxxed versus Unvaxxed study, we had 2,764 variably vaccinated kids over 10 and a half years, and there were 561 who were unvaccinated. We found a huge signal of anemia. That makes a lot of sense because aluminum actually binds to the transferrin. It's a protein that's responsible in your diet when you get dietary iron to move your iron from you and your infant's body into the bone where you can make red blood cells. So if the transferrin's bound to aluminum, it's going to relocate that aluminum to the bone, and that's where we find them. That's the majority depot of the end location of aluminum that's injected. But that transferrin should be available to pick up the iron, and so you're not getting as many red blood cells. So in addition to the metals getting in the brain, causing cellular death and the microglia activation through IL-6, interleukin-6, it's a very well-known pathway how this happens. You have chronic inflammation of the brain, you've got cells that are dying, you've got strange proteins that are not folding right. At the same time, you're not powering the brain enough with oxygen. It totally makes sense. It's kids that are more prone to autism under those conditions might develop autism. It's very straightforward and simple, but it took me reading 2,000 studies, to scratch that itch to go, is there a plausible mechanism? And the best way, after the book, I put out a study called Autism is an acquired cellular detoxification deficiency syndrome. And it talks about all of that. It talks, it cites all the studies, and I actually did I referred to that paper as a study because I actually tested a hypothesis in it, in which I found that the proteins that have genetic variation that contribute to autism tend to be the ones that have to be folded in the endoplasmic reticulum with energy. Well, the aluminum and mercury both impact the ability of the cell to properly fold proteins through a process called endoplasmic reticulum stress. And so if you have endogenous ER stress from genetics, and then you have environmental ER stress, you're going to have a problem with those cells, and that's why they end up dying in the brain. So I believe that aluminum and mercury, that the data support that mercury and aluminum do cause cellular death. It's non-apoptotic death. It's not programmed cell death. This is ER stress-induced death. And the data are all there. And I found that, yeah, there's an overabundance of those kinds of proteins. So why do some people with vaccines not develop autism and other people do? I think it's primarily because there's genetic variation that makes them susceptible to the ER stress from the vaccines. It's a stated hypothesis. I mean, that I presented what data there was to support it. And yeah, so that's how I got involved with what I'm getting involved in. Well, I don't fight against vaccines. I fight for choice. I fight for choice and safer vaccines. That's the only position that I think is defensible. I think the public needs to do their own research. They should know that, especially if the science on coronavirus vaccines is done by people who stand to profit from coronavirus vaccines, and not done by an independent agency, not an independent entity, not a regulatory agency, because they're captured. The pharmaceutical companies influence them through donations. But if it were done truly in an independent way, then the efficacy of the Moderna vaccine, for instance, would not have been published at 94.5%. They would have left the people in the study that got coronavirus after the first dose. Instead, Moderna took out the patients that got coronavirus after the first dose, and I was able to recalculate from their data. I think the efficacy of Moderna is only 75.4%. And I don't have any financial conflicts of interest. I'm not in bed with Pfizer or the Russians or anybody else on this. I just think that there's a debate that we have to have. Should the public be spoken to about what it looks like to make sausage if you're doing science? Or will it just automatically imbue such distrust and such skepticism? And I believe that that's healthy. I believe that it's healthy for the American public to ask questions, but most importantly, to ask the right questions, right? So I was listening like This Week in Virology. It's a very, popular podcast that talks about right now nothing about coronavirus week after week, and they do a good job. I mean, technically but they're talking about pathogenic priming. They're out there talking about, well, maybe this vaccine's not for some people. They're not being shut down. They're talking about the same stuff that everybody else is talking about. They just do it under the, well, we're scientists and we get to talk about it. Then why are you on YouTube? One of the panelists
Yeah.
said, well, should you really be saying that? Because you're going to scare the public. Shouldn't we decide whether you should come to the public with this information or not? And he's like, no, it reduces the efficacy. He was talking about the UK variant. Or some of the variants reduce the efficacy of one of the vaccines down to 50%. He's like, 50% efficacy is still pretty good. Now, if you want vaccines, okay, you take his advice and, you go for it. If you're a vaccine skeptic, most of them due to personal experience, not because they heard a bunch of stuff on the internet. And that's the thing. The vaccine risk denialists will never get it until they realize that they're the only people that have the power to make it better for everyone. It's not the minority. And I'm writing a book right now. I'm not going to tell you the title, but I'm going to deal with all this in a book. The first sentence, I'll read you the first sentence. I'll just memorize it. It's the tyranny of the majority in a free society requires the wisdom of the minority. Right? It has to be balanced by the wisdom of the minority. And that's what we're missing. We're missing any quality control feedback on vaccines. The vaccine manufacturers are not liable. They're made not liable. They have no incentive to improve their product. The government has an agenda, a spoken overt agenda to reduce vaccine risk awareness in the American population. So the information that you get is not reliable. I mean, the CDC was just caught by Cheryl Atkinson, right? And not by Cheryl Atkinson, but by a representative, a congressional representative, saying that, yes, people that had coronavirus should still get the vaccine. And so this representative called the CDC and taped his conversation. And he said, what's your position on this? Because it seems like it's not a really good thing to do. There's people dying, and he was concerned about it. And they said, actually, you're right, they shouldn't, because, and their rationale was, there's not enough vaccines to go around. They already have some immunity. We probably shouldn't say that we recommend it because somebody somewhere is going to die, basically, and they're thinking from coronavirus because somebody that didn't need it got the vaccine. It's a waste of a vaccine. And they said, we're going to get to it. We're going to fix that. About a week went by. He hasn't heard anything. He calls back. He gets rear abdomen shoe shot on the phone. She's like number 2 at CDC. And she said, yeah, we haven't fixed that yet. He's like, why? He's, well, because no reason. It wasn't intentional. We just have a lot to do. We read a lot of things, a lot of excuses. But the fact is, they still haven't changed their website. They still haven't updated to the medical community that people that have already had coronavirus might not want to get this vaccine because they're not allowed to say risk. They're not allowed to say, yes, we see that a lot of these healthcare workers, look at the healthcare workers that are dying after they get the vaccine if they already had coronavirus, right? Let me ask you, when people say, oh, it's just coincidence. Let me ask you this. Name one other event that happens in medical care of healthcare workers where people of different ages, really healthy people, die suddenly within hours or within a day of that medical procedure being done to them across healthcare all the same week. That's what we're looking at, right? The probability of these events being independent of each other, astronomically small. It's astronomically small that these are just coincidences. So I don't buy the coincidence argument about those healthcare workers dying, but I do buy various hypotheses like pathogenic priming, like the hypothesis that there might be some residual antigen from the virus in or on the cells around the body, so you get a systemic response. I buy the hypothesis that in some people the virus might be uptaken by their genome, because there's science that shows that, right? So you go with the science and you say, hey, these are the possibilities, not, oh yeah, coincidence. You never hear healthcare workers who are 50 years old, 40 years old, dying of unknown causes. It doesn't happen. Oh, it just died. We don't know why. It doesn't happen. Oh, it's going to take 2 months to figure it out. Really? It's going to, if a person potentially dies from a vaccine, it takes 2 months. But if they die from the virus, instant. Okay, they have the virus. It must have been the virus, no matter what. Even if there's a motorcycle accident.
I tweeted that. I said it because after Hank Aaron passed away, I tweeted that it's funny how if you die before getting the vaccine, it's assumed that it's COVID related. If you die after getting the vaccine, it's assumed that it's not COVID related. I'm like, it's just so silly. I mean, the thing about a lot of this stuff is some of the stuff has even been discussed in the public. Dr. Fauci, during one of the many TV appearances, because he loves to be on TV and be a celebrity, but one of his many interviews, he said, like, I don't remember exactly what the question was that led to this answer, but he did answer that, yeah, there are cases where sometimes you get the vaccine, it actually makes it worse. It can make you sicker. It can have a negative effect when you do get sick. It can actually make you sicker. And he was saying, when we want to avoid doing that. But I mean, people just kind of poo-pooed that and kind of just looked past it and didn't even engage in that idea of like, okay, well, how do we know any of these vaccines aren't doing that? How do we know that, the next vaccine's not doing that? I mean, it's amazing to me that the word, you use the word skepticism. And to me, it's hilarious that like the people who are actually skeptics are the ones being debunked by skeptics. It's like now it's like if you're a skeptic, it usually means you're just going with the mainstream narrative and you're debunking everybody who says anything against the mainstream narrative. And I'm like,
they don't have a monopoly on skepticism. Skepticism is an actual philosophical position where you doubt, you doubt knowledge claims in the absence of sufficient evidence for or against. Every person in the United States has to make a choice. Are you going to get the vaccine or not? Every person has some skepticism. And what the battle is, it's an information battle on their part, right, to eliminate skepticism. That's not scientific. That's not helpful. That guarantees if they could, they would vaccinate every person. I say they, let's be specific. I hate these discussions where, talk about a general they. But the people who deny vaccine risk and injury, whoever they are, they're a heterogeneous group, but they're small. The people who vocally deny it, if they could vaccinate every single person in the United States with one of these vaccines, they would. And to me, that would only serve to identify all the people who would die from that vaccine program. That's all it would accomplish. Because that means 100% coverage. Oh, look, we're fine. We eradicate. Okay, you're not going to eradicate coronavirus. Okay. We stop the transmission. No, you're not going to stop transmission of this thing. It's not going to happen.
The vaccine doesn't. I mean, that's the other thing that's hilarious is how many people are regurgitating this sentence of, well, things will get back to normal once we get the vaccine. And then I look at them and I'm like, well, you do realize like the vaccine doesn't, because a lot of what people are saying, and they're not connecting all the dots, is they're saying, well, things will get back to normal when we get the vaccine and most people have the vaccine. And the reason they're saying that is because in many cases, people have finally come to the conclusion that the virus for most people, especially healthy people, it's not really a threat to them. And then they're like, well, what about the elderly? What about the old people? What about, this and that? And it's like, well, now you have to connect the dots and realize like, okay, well, something's not making sense because your logic is get the vaccine and things will get back to normal because you don't want to spread the virus to old people, but it doesn't stop the spread. None of the vaccines have proven to stop the spread of it. So it's not going to protect anybody except the person possibly who's getting it. And even that is obviously very subjective. And that's, the science isn't settled on that yet, even though they like to tell you that it is.
They definitely moved the goalposts, right? It was get the vaccine. We're going to shut this thing down. We're going to stop transmission. The reality is, Ricky, that we have a situation where the CDC, Dr. Fauci, the FDA, None of them are using all of the available information in a calculation of risk. I've never seen a calculation of the coverage of the vaccine that's needed, considering that there's X percentage of people that are already immune due to exposure. And I've never seen any calculation that uses the published estimation that 33% of Americans are probably already immune because of prior exposure to other things. So we're somewhere around 33 to 40% immune already. Okay. They need to be forthright and honest with the population. They need to stop this. They're almost juvenile in their approaches to this. And when I say juvenile, it's because they think that denying a problem exists will make it go away, right? They think that if you stop people from talking to each other, if you take down YouTube videos, if you censor the internet, that dissent will go away. It won't. That's not how it works. You're going to amplify it. It's going to right? You ban something in the United States of America, every one person that would have seen it, now 10 more people, because the people that you banned it from, if they banned your video, you're going to make sure that it gets the most promotion ever. You're going to put it through all your channels, right?
Talking to a lot of content creators, I mean, I think in time it is what's going to happen. I've talked to a lot of other platforms like Odyssey and Float, and you
Sure.
have BitChute, you have all these other alternatives where now that's where you go get your alternative media. If I go on BitChute or Odyssey library and I go look for a documentary on vaccines or a interview about the topic, I can actually find conflicting opinions and perspectives, and I can come to my own conclusion.
Right.
YouTube, Google, I mean, unfortunately, Google is the most used search engine, and YouTube is basically the second most used because that's where a lot of people go to look for information. So they have a monopoly of information. And one thing I've heard you say in interviews, and I'm right with you on this, is I'm not pro or anti-vaccine. I'm pro information. What really pisses me off is that parents, I'm one, I have two beautiful little kids, one boy and girl, and I have parents, even friends of mine, who come to me and they'll listen to a specific podcast and they'll say, "Oh, I feel so guilty vaccinating my kids after listening to that podcast." And I reassure them that, like, hey, you shouldn't feel guilty because this isn't your fault. You made the best decision you could make as a parent based on the information you had.
100%.
What pisses me off is that fact that you didn't even have the other side of the argument. You didn't even have access to anybody who, I mean, look at Del Bigtree. I had Del Bigtree on multiple times. The last time he was on he's been on my other show, the Union of the Unwanted, but the last time he was on Ripple Effect at the height of the lockdown, iTunes wouldn't play the video. It wasn't there. When I had Mickey Willis on from Plandemic, iTunes, coincidentally, again, it just happens to be another controversial guest, wouldn't the video wasn't there. People would send screenshots of iTunes and that podcast would be missing. So all I'm saying is, like, these are just people with opinions. They're not spreading violence. They're not, in many cases, they're well-researched opinions and much more research than the average person on the street. Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, how about all the doctors? Dr. Carrie Madej, so I've had so many doctors on that their perspectives, Dr. Scott Jensen, their perspectives are being suppressed. And it's weird because, like, I always tell people, if you're going to get your knee looked at or some pain you're having and you had, a second opinion, a third opinion, if you found 3 or 4 doctors that had different perspectives on what was going on, that's completely fine. But during the pandemic, God forbid anybody said anything differently, that somebody analyzed the information and came up with a different conclusion. Because if you're not saying what Dr. Fauci is saying or what this person's saying, then it's pseudoscience and it should be suppressed and it's dangerous information.
Well, look, nobody should come to me for any advice on broken ankles. Okay, I may remember something from Boy Scouts on how to maybe splint it, right, and keep you stable. I don't pretend to be a medical doctor. I don't think anybody that has an opinion about this has, we have the right to ask questions. And if we can't find answers, we have the right to research it ourselves. And if we can't find answers, we have the right to continue to research. And here we have in the United States of America, a public education system that's supposed to teach us all how to do rational inquiry. It's supposed to teach us science, right? It's not 1760 where half of our children, don't go to college, right? Or more, don't even finish a high school, right? Get a high school diploma for some segments of the society. But it's a good thing that people are skeptical. And to the people that are spending all of this money lobbying to try to take away exemptions, oh my God, the billions of dollars to take away exemptions, it's not going to work, because these people are not going to take the vaccines no matter what you do. You could hand them $1 million check. These people would not vaccinate their children.
My kids are completely unvaccinated. I state it all the time because I think a lot of unvaccinated, some parents who are skeptical of vaccines sometimes are worried about it starting an argument if they talk about it, or it's a kind of a controversial topic. But I like to reassure people that there are kids out there who got all their vaccines and are completely fine. There's also kids like mine who got 0 vaccines and are completely fine. Yeah. So this, I just, the reason I talk about this is because I think a lot of people like myself, when I was doing all the research and whatnot, it was real easy for me to be like, yeah, screw vaccines, until I had my own children, and then the pediatricians constantly putting seeds of doubt, and my wife, who was like all on board with our decision, little by little, every time we went to go see the pediatrician. And really, I mean, we never see the pediatrician. When they were little, we went to go see them more often because we keep up with like their height and weight as their newborns. But
right.
Outside of that, they're never sick, so there's no reason to ever go see them besides check their height and weight every 6 months or so. And so, yeah, when we went to go see the pediatrician, they would always, before, it was like the hint, like, yeah, we're going to wait, wink, wink, stop harassing us. That was kind of like the code word, and they would accept that. And little by little, they would stop, accepting that and start giving us more of a hard time and make us fill out some ridiculous paperwork and do all these things. And then the last time I saw my pediatrician before we got the letter home saying that we're not welcome there anymore, we got in a little conversation because she kept just pushing this on us, and I would have to go because my wife was so intimidated, and she doesn't like confrontation. So she couldn't regurgitate her reasoning as well, so she was a little worried about like, oh, they're going to give me a hard time, this and that. But even her, in the beginning, she started having doubts. She's like, what if we're making the wrong decision? What if we're, and I'm like, they're going to scare the crap out of you. I'm like, according to our pediatricians, neither of our kids should be alive right now. They told us the first time we showed up that they need to be right on schedule with every vaccine, because if not, they're going to get some life-threatening disease that could have been prevented by these vaccines. And this was like, my son's turning 6, my daughter's turning 5 this year, and I'm like, they're fine. They're actually like healthier than most kids that, and I have a lot of friends around my age that have kids around the age of my children. So I can kind of just do a eyeball test on seeing other people's kids, and other people's kids are a little bit more sick. They have a little bit more issues. They don't have as much energy, or cognitively might not seem like they're quite as advanced. And I'm not saying it's all due to vaccines. I think it's like you talked about autism. I had a guest on not too long ago that did a whole book on it. He wrote a book on autism, and he kind of stayed away from the vaccine aspect of it because he's like, you might get into it later, but it's so controversial, and he wanted to not lose credit for all the other things, like the environmental aspects of it, nutrition, all these other things that are equally as important, and could be, it's not just one thing. I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's vaccines cause autism. Like, well, we're surrounded by synthetic chemicals all the time, and the stuff that we wear, the stuff that that we sit on, and all the things around us, we're eating food that is less and less food and more chemicals, and just a science.
That's all true, but here's the thing. For the majority of patients that have, the majority of families that have severe autism, I think it's a majority of them say that it happened right after a vaccine.
That is true. And when people say that they're crazy, like, all those parents are crazy. You're a parent. How close do you keep up with your kids' cognitive like progression as a
Day
child.
to day to day.
Exactly.
When they
Every
were
little
infants,
thing.
it was like, oh my God, look, they have
Exactly.
fine motor
Yep.
skills. My point is the probability that all of these parents would have the same exact story of the vaccine reaction prior to autism as well. The banging of the head, the encephalitic cry, the arching of the back, okay, maybe some seizures and so on. The probability that they would all have the same. I mean, Paulie Tommy and the Vaxxed 2 team have done a fantastic job bringing forward all these studies, all these case studies, really, all these individual case studies that no doctor anywhere will touch. Why won't the doctors touch it? There's a wealth of information. We know who the people are. They've self-identified in public. Go do a case study, do the science. The fact is, yes, although it's multivariate in nature, it's also kind of the kids have reached a tipping point that day. They reached a tipping point, and we can see that in Paul's data. In Paul's data, in the first quartile of vaccine uptake, you have a certain amount of autism. In the second quartile, you have more autism. Well, he checks for family history, and he looks for things like stopping making eye contact, not making your developmental milestones, and then he stops vaccinating. So the first quartile, you have this much autism. The second quartile, you have 4 times the amount of autism-related office visits compared to unvaccinated. And then in the most vaccinated, there's no autism in the most vaccinated. That's a signal of stopping it. He's actually preventing autism. And his study-wide, in this cohort, his study-wide autism rate is lower than national average by far. Study-wide, his rate of ADHD is lower than national average. And out of 561 kids in the unvaccinated, 100% unvaccinated, I'll tell you right now, your kids don't have ADHD. I'll tell you that they don't. Right?
I have my own opinions on ADHD. I mean, kids.
Well, wait, let me tell you, 561 kids in that cohort, not one of them had ADHD. That's 561 confirmations that we do not have. Now, I'm not a positivist in science. I'm a falsificationist, but there's 561 counts towards where's the ADHD, right? Given the rate of ADHD, which is really high, okay, in that nationally, where's the ADHD in the unvaccinated? And it is in the vaccinated. And in the least vaccinated, this is the other thing, there's a dose effect. In the least vaccinated in that study, the fifth percentile vaccine uptake, compared to the 95th percentile vaccinated, the most vaccinated kids have 55 times more autism than the least vaccinated kids.
Wow.
So right. So when we say there's no autism in the third and fourth, no increase in autism in the third and fourth quartile, and you say that, and we say that there's no ADHD in the unvaccinated, this has to shake things up. This has to create a problem for the field of psychiatry that are drugging our kids, right? The agenda to make sure that all the kids that get the drugs so they can sit still in their classroom.
Well, psychiatry is based on bullshit science anyways. I mean, it's all, I mean, or not even science. I mean, when they'll give you a pill by just asking you a couple of questions, and then they'll call it a chemical imbalance, even though they never test you to see which chemical's imbalanced, how imbalanced it is. So how do you regulate a chemical that you're not even sure is imbalanced in the first place? You become a guinea pig. Try this pill. Try that pill.
That's called diagnosis by treatment, and it's highly unethical. Diagnosis by treatment is, I suspect that you have this. I'm going to give you this drug. If it doesn't work, come back. I'll give you something else. It's highly unethical. I talk about it in Cures versus Profits. The thickest chapter in that book is on ADHD, and it's entitled ADHD. It's their mind, not yours. So even back then, before, I wrote that chapter before the vaccines. I was pissed off because these are kids' brains that they're messing with. They're putting them on speed, methamphetamines, and they're, instead of taking some approach to saying, this is how you balance out your life, this is how you're going to make it better. And then what was worse of all is they had this pharmacy industry expert going around to parents groups saying, if your kid has ADHD, there's nothing you can do about it. Don't bother to try to treat it. It's genetic. There was never any studies that showed that it was genetic, but it's genetic. Okay. He would say hoopla, hoopla, hoopla about these gene names and things like that. It's not genetic. For it to be genetic, your parents had to have ADHD. And we've been, now in the future, it'll look genetic, because if everybody smoked, then lung cancer would appear to be genetic, right?
Good point. Yeah.
Right. So if you drug everybody and you vaccinate everybody, it's genetic. Oh, that's the environment that we're in. Oh, well, you know, it's genetic. No, it's not. It's the interaction between the environment and the genetics. And that we're actually fighting. They're fighting to try to minimize knowledge in the population about science, and I'm fighting to try to increase it. They're fighting to try to minimize it, you know. Granted, these things can be complex. A causal pathway analysis can be complex, but they're trying to minimize the ability of people to think, and I'm trying to maximize it. So that's why I teach courses at IPAK EDU. We have Shannon Kroner is going to be teaching. Dr. Shannon Kroner is going to be teaching a course in psychology. That's coming up in March. We have Dr. Michael Gaeta teaching a course in just readings in the biology of nutrition by the age of people. So what's going on when you're an infant? What's, you know, all the way to old age? Because I believe the public health endeavor includes things like empowering people in how to think rationally. Don't just the patronizing, you know, patriarchal approach where old white guys are telling the world how it's got to be. The public health's like the last place for that, right? Old white guys telling the world how it's got to be. That's I thought we were done with that. Well, now it's going to be a bunch of middle-aged people of different colors and shapes and sizes, and that's just fine with me. But they're all going to sing the same tune that those old white guys were saying. So it's still the old white guys.
Yeah.
So
So, you know, let's get into Dr. Paul Thomas. I
yeah.
almost up again. Paul Thomas's study. How did you get it involved in this? And also, let's get into some of the details, because obviously there's a lot of details that will kind of really help people understand how much you really thought this out, you know, in regards to partially vaccinated to unvaccinated to, like, okay, are these parents just have healthier kids because if you're anti-vaccine, usually you're more likely to buy organic or non-GMO or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
All these things are kind of you know, well thought out in a part of the study to kind of filter out what you know, those things to come up with a good logical conclusion.
Well, thank you. So I'll start at the beginning, right? I met Paul through, you know, networking, and it came to my attention that he was under attack by the ethics board because he had some unvaccinated kids in his practice, which is consistent with the law, the lay law of the state of Oregon. Oregon allows parents to vaccinate or not vaccinate. It's the legislative law signed many years ago by a governor, put it into law that it's necessary that physicians in Oregon respect choice. Okay. So that's when you have a state that allows philosophical exemptions, that's what that means. Okay. Or religious exemptions, that's what that means. And so for an ethics crew to come after Paul, I said, well, Paul, the best that I can do is I can write an essay. I can write an essay to the ethics board, and I entitled the essay "In Defense of an Ethical Physician." And I pointed out to these people on the medical ethics board that what Paul was doing was following the law of the land. Further, he was also following federal regulations that require that anybody that's enrolled in a human subjects experiment be given informed consent. And I said earlier, every post-market vaccine surveillance study is a human subject trial, but we're never consented. So I challenged them to go back to their own practice and look to see in the practice of how they consent people to their vaccine program if they're not in violation of both Oregon state law and with federal law. So I sent this essay to Paul's lawyer. Paul's lawyer sent it to the chair of the medical ethics board, and they dropped their inquiry as a result of my communication to them. So I just challenged them. That was very powerful. So next thing I know, he says, well, you know, Jack, I know you're expert in clinical research study design, and you've done a lot of science. He goes, I have a data set because the medical board's coming after me now, and they're asking me to show that the unvaccinated kids in the practice are not less healthy than the vaccinated. So the medical board actually requested the data. So he had an independent MD who's expert in data come in and pull the data from the practice. And from there, I designed a vax versus unvaxxed study saying, all right, we want people that are, and Paul was involved in the inclusion criteria too, people that are born into the practice. So we don't have somebody that got a lot of vaccines and then came in at a particular age. They had to be born in the practice and they had to come to the office within the first 3 months or something like that. So that's where those inclusion exclusion criteria come from. And that's pretty much it. We didn't exclude people that had prior evidence of disease. We didn't exclude people whose parents were smoking or not smoking. We didn't include people who are granola eaters or not granola eaters, right? We just said, come on and we're going to look at this. We ended up with 2,764 patients that got one vaccine over a 10.5-year period and 561 that got 0 vaccines. Now, when the data came to me, it was completely de-identified. So I have no violations for HIPAA, nothing like that. In fact, we actually created the situation in such a way that if we had to go back and confirm any of the data points, we had 2 people that were trained and that were HIPAA compliant, HIPAA registered to go in and look at the de-identified and the identified data. Very, very rigorous ethical approach to this. So I got the data and I said, okay, wait a minute. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort the data into patients that got the vaccines and patients that didn't get the vaccines. No big deal. Then I'm going to rank the patients from the highest vaccine uptake to the lowest. And you could see, just looking at the data sheet itself, you could see where, if you're looking at the health outcomes and the diagnosis, the number of times they have to go to see the doctor and so on, you could just see the differences between the vaccinated and unvaccinated. The vaccinated are all pockmarked all over the data set with diagnosis of asthma and so on, and the unvaccinated, it looks really clean. So the difference is pretty stark. So if you look at just the incidence of diagnosis, if you just say what percentage of people came up with this or that diagnosis, like allergic rhinitis, you can end up getting a statistical analysis done, and you could do relative risk, you could do odds ratios and that kind of thing. Those are pretty standard. But I saw an opportunity here because I could very easily calculate from the data. The data that came to me were billed office visits related to a particular health outcome. So if there's a mark in the data, it's because the kid came to the office, not for just a well child visit, but they came to the office specifically for allergic rhinitis and it was billed. Okay. So these are these are patients that are experiencing symptoms enough that they have to seek healthcare. Okay. So I decided to come up with a new method. It's called the relative incidence of office visits. And what it is the ratio of the number of times that kids, say for anemia, have to be seen by the doctor independently, not just for screening, but independently for treatment and consideration of anemia, if they're vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And what we see in the very famous figure in the chart 5, I think it is, figure 5, you see a massive, massive difference in the vaccinated and unvaccinated and the number of times these kids have to go to the doctor. For instance, there are 0 office visits in ADHD related in the unvaccinated. 0. No family was ever billed for ADHD, right? But as a check on that, right? So the thing is, maybe just the vaccinated people come to the doctors more. Maybe the unvaccinated people avoid the doctor because they're skeptics and they don't trust doctors. Well, first of all, many of these patients came to Dr. Paul because he'll tolerate their vaccine skepticism. He'll talk with them about vaccine risk. They want to know. There's never been a more inquisitive group of people than the non-vaccinating or partially vaccinating people. They have questions about vaccines, right? So he didn't give them the 7-minute health well child visit. He would sit down and show them the CDC schedule. He would go through that. He would show them the vaccine information statements. He would go through that, product information, whatever, answer all their questions, and then they would decide. And so he's providing them with what I think is true informed consent, just like I told the ethics board. Second, we had a negative control in the study. The negative control was office visits, right? So everything else being equal, you'd expect that the vaccinated and unvaccinated would have the same amount of well child visits, okay? And so as a check on that, what we did is we said, well, listen, if there's more vaccines in some kids than others, then the ratio of well child visits in that percentage vaccination uptake, 5% to 95%, the ratio to the unvaccinated should be a positive association. The most vaccinated should be coming to the doctors most because they're least skeptical, okay? So if that relationship in this population holds true, then we would see it in these data, and we don't. It's perfectly flat. The least vaccinated and the most vaccinated are all going to the same healthcare visit office, right? So the other thing is that Paul knows that the unvaccinated come into the office, come in because he makes them. The well child visit, you got to be here because I need to provide you with informed consent. And if I don't, I'm in trouble with the medical board, right? So he's pretty insistent about make sure you're here so you don't put me in trouble. We'll talk about your kid. We'll talk about your life. We'll get the head measurement and so on. So we have another control in the study, which is the fever. Fever is causally associated with vaccines. The more vaccines that you get, the more fevers you should get. And that's what we see. There's more office visits along that Klein of vaccine uptake, or the axis of vaccine uptake. There's more office visits related to fever. So that tells us with the positive negative control, any condition that we see that's increasing with vaccines, that should be considered, at least from this one data set, a potential causal relationship. It doesn't confirm it. We're discovering, right? This is the first one on this population. So I'm content to say that, listen, look at, when you read the paper, don't just go with figure 5. Go to figure 5, read about the negative positive control, but then also look at the rest of the study results that just do look at the incidence. The incidence itself, we see gastroenteritis, we see many of these things that were suspected to be increased with vaccine uptake that parents knew, otitis media, right? Eczema and so on. We know that these things, these autoimmune conditions are increased with increased vaccines. And so it's robust to the office visit versus just the incidence. So the criticism that there's, look at, these are granola crunching moms. I've changed it to, all right, here's the deal. If granola crunching moms have solved the problem of child wellness, granola crunching moms have the solution, then all pediatrics needs to do right now is find out what that magic raisin is. There must be a magic raisin out there that these moms are I'm changing it to the magic raisin hypothesis, that these kids are much healthier because their parents are giving them a magic raisin. And I was recently speaking with a colleague of mine, and he's saying, you're making me feel, I'm vaccinated. He's like, you're making me feel like my parents didn't care about me. Like maybe the unvaccinated kids love their kids more. And so now that's the abusive vaccinating parent hypothesis, right? If you're vaccinating your kid, you might be doing them harm. I mean, we don't do that. The vaccine risk aware community doesn't use that kind of social shaming. We want to move into a world where that's not done. Why? Because it's ugly. But this guy was talking about himself. So
Well, and it's an unfair fight because, again, like we stated before, if you are honestly looking into the topic, Del Bigtree gets pulled off YouTube. Over and over again, you see people just being banned off YouTube who are just saying anything against the mainstream narrative, anything that is even questioning vaccines. I am still very surprised I'm still on YouTube with the fact that I've had so many people on my show. I've never monetized. I've never done anything like that. I always age restrict my stuff. So I think that might be the little secret of kind of staying out of their way and off, not out of their forecast. But it really is one of those things where, it's so hard for people to actually do skeptical research and find that information. So the second you Google something, when all you're seeing is Dr. Wakefield's a fraud, anti-vaxxers are conspiracy theorists, or this has been debunked, that has been debunked. Unfortunately, most people aren't going to go over and beyond, just going on Google and YouTube, because they might not be aware of how manipulated and controlled that is. I mean, I've had Zach Voorhees on, who's a Google whistleblower. He worked for Google, and he talked about the things that were like blacklisted, cancer cures and all these things. When I had Dr. Brzezinski on my show, and I've told this story before, so apologies for people who've heard it, but years ago, he was he was my first 12 months of doing the show. He was one of my first guests, and I had no platform. I didn't have many people listening, And I remember watching his documentary and seeing interviews with him, and he would talk about how, Big Pharma would have trolls that would just chase you down and just discredit everything he does and everybody he talks to. And I'm just like, oh, that seems crazy. The second I announced that he was going to be on my show, and this is, like I said, podcast just took off 2013, 2014, whenever it was. And immediately I started getting just trolls, just fake accounts just tweeting me saying he's pseudoscience, he's a murderer, people are dead because of him. And I'm like checking these accounts, I'm like, where are these people? But
Yeah.
the thing is, they're planting the seed of doubt. Somebody's going to see that little statement and just think like, oh, maybe they're right, maybe this guy is crazy, maybe he is pseudoscience. And to the point where even my co-host at the time, who's one of my good friends, and used to do the show with me, I remember I would tell him in advance, like, hey, this is who I got on the show, and I'll look into it. And then he text messaged me. He's like, I don't know, I'm seeing a lot of stuff about him being pseudoscience and being his research being all bullshit. I'm like, good, because I'm like, I don't want you coming in being a fanboy. I'm like, I want you coming in being skeptical,
Yeah.
asking questions, and then coming up with your own conclusions at the end. And at the end of the show, that's exactly what happened. He's like, he's everything he says makes sense. And so it's obvious that if there's trolls attacking what at the time was a very small unknown podcast, so they're going over and beyond to make sure that they're discrediting people who are going against big pharma and the FDA and CDC and all these organizations.
Yeah.
Then what other lengths are they going to? And have you been attacked? Have you been kicked off anything? Have you seen any?
I'm I'm constantly approached by the same kinds of accounts, just the vitriol, the nastiness, and it doesn't mean a thing to me, right? You look at it and they think that you're getting under your skin or something, and like it's so weak.
I'm
It's
the
so
same way. None of it. None. I
it's so
Yeah, every once in
pathetic.
a while I'll read comments because I
It's
like to actually connect with people who say nice things. I want to.
Of course I read. Yeah,
Yeah,
I read almost all the comments to my tweets if I can keep up with them. The point is, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you see somebody that's just name calling, I learned how to deal with that a long time ago, right?
yeah. I mean, when we
So,
were kids, right? I mean, you should.
but more formally, the British society and people in Great Britain, they have a formality to this. If you're having a rational discourse with somebody and someone starts calling you names, that person lost. That's all they got left. That's all they got left. And that's basically all they have left. All they have left is to come after my character. All they have left is to come after, my expertise, the ad hominem effect. He's not an expert in this. He's not an expert in that. And, not once did any of those 100 people that came to my office at the University of Pittsburgh say, well, you can't be involved in lung transplant. You can't be involved in cancer research. You're not an oncologist. You're not, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely
But in
ridiculous.
science, isn't it true that in a lot of cases, a lot of breakthroughs are people who are slightly outside of those expertise, or people who,
Exactly, because they see the whole tree. They don't just see the little
yeah,
twig of the branch that they're on, right?
yep.
Here's what hasn't happened to me, to my knowledge, right? Right, they haven't sent any skin. They haven't sent a woman or a man after me, to try to put me in a compromising position that I know of. They may have. I didn't take the bait, so they probably got tired, right?
You didn't get an invite to Epstein's Island or anything like that?
No, no. My kids have not been intimidated. Nobody's thrown a firebomb in the front of my porch of my house because my ever powerful, watchful neighbor across the way, she'll get you. My neighbor will get you. She's going to nail you. The thing of it is, kids are getting hurt, right? So we're all having fun about all the trolls, but they want to make money. They want to shut us down. They want to intimidate. Kids are getting hurt. And just like those parents, you could hand them $1 million check. You could come to me with a $4 billion offer. I wouldn't do anything other than objective science. Right now, I wouldn't touch it. To me, it's blood money. There's nothing that anyone can say to me that says until they break, they need to bend and then they need to break and they need to say, yes, we screwed up on aluminum. Midkiss, FDA screwed up on aluminum. We made it up. CDC, yes, we screwed up on autism. We made it up. Until they come out and say this, none of us are ever going to back down. none of us are ever going to stop doing what we do. That's the reality. They can firebomb in front of my house. I don't care. The point is, that'll just prove how right I am. That'll just show the world you're angry, ugly ass. Okay, these kids are getting hurt. These kids and adults are dying, and all you have is denialism. The reality is, you have, and I'm talking to Pharma, I'm talking to CDC. You have in your plans, what, 170 more vaccines? You think you're going to add those to the schedule and not everybody's going to become vaccine risk aware? I mean, come on. I know that the CDC calculated and the FDA calculated exactly the amount of aluminum that they thought per body weight would be tolerable before people noticed.
What?
Yes, they actually did. They had their own accumulation diagram. And they said, look, this is the body weight, body weight tolerance. Okay, and if we go above this, the fact is, the pediatric schedule is packed to the hilt with aluminum, as far as they dare take it. What does that mean? It means that anybody that's genetically susceptible and can't tolerate aluminum, guess what, folks? There is a thing called aluminum allergy. Aluminum itself can be an antigen. The body could create antibodies against aluminum itself. There's an aluminum patch kit. So let's do this, Ricky. If I was the CDC and I want to get out of this mess, right? First thing I would do is I would say, everybody that was involved in the vaccine cover-up, early buyout. Your careers are over. We're going to buy you out. We're going to pay you the same thing that we would have paid you for the rest of your career. Here's your retirement. Go away. Then I would bring in brand new people from academia that have no association with pharma whatsoever. I would outlaw any association with the threat of being fired of a single dime of money or any other financial or non-financial conflict of interest with anybody who's making vaccines. And then I would make the following announcement. We took a bet and we lost. We bet the health of the American public that you guys could tolerate these vaccines better than we hoped that we, right? So now we're going to do vaccine risk awareness program at the CDC. We're going to do vaccine safety reform completely. Everything is going to be competed on the platform of safety. Because guess what? We don't have rampant rotavirus. We don't have rampant chickenpox, right? So it's going to come back a little bit as we're doing new vaccines, but we're going to compete vaccine after vaccine after vaccine objectively on the platform of safety. So we're going to take out the aluminum. We're going to take out all mercury. We're going to take out the unsafe epitopes like Dr. Lyons-Weiler has been telling us that we should ever since Zika, right? We need to take, and he did it with, we need to take out the things that are in vaccine that are not safe. It's very straightforward. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do vaccinated versus unvaccinated, every vaccine individually for 4 years. People that want the vaccine, here it is, try it. People that don't, you're in the control group. We'll match the control group on demographics, magic reasons. We'll do all that. We'll match it because we can tell who's out there. We'll get that data, right? And then we'll do people who want multiple vaccines. If they start taking multiple vaccines, whatever combinations they take, then we'll start doing vaccinated versus unvaccinated. We're going to dispense with ACIP. We're going to fire ACIP, go home, you're done. We're going to dispense with ACIP recommendations. Vaccines are a tool, a medical tool. If you don't want it, don't worry about it. We're not going to force it on you. If they did that, they could win the hearts and minds of Americans across the world. They could get their legitimacy back. Americans across the country, sorry. They could get their legitimacy back, and we wouldn't have to enact Plan B. Plan B is what we're going to do because CDC will never do that. Plan B is the creation of 80 research centers around the country that are independently funded, independently operating. They can't talk to each other. They can't have any contact with pharma. If they do, the reason why there's 80 is because there's 50 states. We don't want to have the Oklahoma branch shut down. We basically have them randomly or arbitrarily sprinkled throughout the country geographically. And if one of them cheats, it gets shut down. And then we pop up another new one somewhere else. We don't hire the old people. This is what we need to do. They can't be in bed with pharma. They can't take any money from pharma. They can't have spouses who are with pharma. There's no conflicts of interest at all. And their job is not to study vaccines. Their job is to, for 11 months out of the year, study what's killing Americans and making us sick. Broad question, brand new start. What's killing American citizens and making us sick? Then they write a report. Each one of these nodes writes a report. And then those reports go to all the Senate committees in the US Senate. Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Health, Secretary of Defense, all of them, all the way across the board. They all weigh in on, their aides weigh in on an independent report from the secretary's level, the committee's level. And that report goes to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So there's your national defense. National Defense, the Senate Intelligence Committee, then informs the President of the United States. These are the risks to the American public when it comes to health and death. This is what's killing people and making them sick. And they also inform the President pro tempore in the House. That's the Vice President. That's all this. That's all this thing does. It doesn't have authority. It doesn't have emergency authority. It simply monitors. It's basically an intelligentsia. It's a network of people that are looking to see what's the third leading cause of death, Ricky. It's medical errors. Until 2020. Now, the misdiagnosis of COVID-19 and treating people with ventilators makes medical errors the first leading cause of death. This entity would find that because there's no blowback on them if they do. It's all objective. People should know. Then we can make grants out of, other, NIH can then fund grants that are designed to make a better seatbelt, make a better this, make a better that. What are the, how do we do away with the opioid conflict? It's all backwards and upside down. And until we actually build that, we have nothing to fight for. We're putting all of our energy, generation after generation now, fighting against pharma and fighting against CDC, right? This has gone on for 30 years. Now we need to build something that we're going to fight for. So I have this Plan B published in the International Journal of Vaccine Research. It's on the web. You can find it at jameslyons-weiler.com. or hashtag Plan B at my Twitter at LifeBioMedGuru. The censorship issues, all the else, all the name calling, none of that matters. It's irrelevant and it's futile. I hate to use that word, but it is. It's futile because they will not win in the long run. Even look at what they have to do, even though they managed to lock down the entire world, right? And we're still here. We're still here, Ricky. They locked down the whole world, and we're here in spades. There's more and more people that are like, you want me to do what? Okay. You want me to inject an mRNA that's going to hijack my cellular machinery and make proteins that were never made in my body before? I mean, that even freaks out the virologist that I saw on a podcast that got vaccinated. He's like, right now, my cells are making proteins in my body that were never made before. Well, somebody should point it out to him that that's what happens with the natural virus infection as well. Big deal, right? But until they get objective, until they require real science, vaccine skepticism is going to stay. And the more that they push this, the worse it's going to get. The more they push their overreaching agenda, the worse the resistance is going to become. And this is how it works.
Well, the thing is, too, is for people who do believe that vaccines are as safe and as effective as they've been sold, then why wouldn't, like, it almost seems like everybody would have incentive in doing more of these type of vaxxed versus unvaxxed studies, because it's like, as long as the study is good, it'll expose the truth. Like, okay, is it actually causing some harm in some children, or are the anti-vaxxers completely crazy and the vaccines are actually making kids healthier and helping them by preventing them from getting some of these diseases? So like, everybody should have incentive in these studies. Unfortunately, like, a lot of people like myself who have been skeptical of big pharma and vaccines for a long time, that was the study that was like the gold standard of studies. I'm like, why hasn't somebody done this study? Why hasn't people, and so, in your opinion, why, because Dr. Paul's actually getting in trouble, right? He's still, I mean, I believe last I heard, he still hasn't had his license back, right? He got stripped of
They suspended his license 5 days after we published the study on material that they had all year. They had planned for a hearing in December, right? And our paper came out in November. They delayed the hearing till March and then suspended his license on material that they had all this time. So it was retaliatory. This is, again, an amateur mistake. This is a juvenile reaction. They crapped their pants and they overreacted. And it's going to look really, really bad when the Oregon State Legislature figures out that this medical board thinks that they are the law of the land. Because Paul Thomas was following the law that's in place right now in Oregon to provide informed consent. And had he followed the medical board, he would have been in violation of the law. So the question becomes, who's the government of Oregon? The Taliban-like medical board, right? With their Sharia-like laws that they're saying they're decreeing based on what they think, or the legislative body that takes input from the population and votes on it, democracy. So is it democracy or Sharia law? And apologies to anybody who's Muslim, I could say the same thing, democracy or any Christian law, Jewish law, whatever, right? It amazes me that the medical board thinks that they're going to get away with this. It dumbfounds the mind. It really just, it's crazy that they think that the right thing to do for them is to blow this up right at the time that they're trying to push through a mandate for vaccines. Like that, like they're not going to, galvanize resistance against the removal of the exemptions, right? So they think that they've got some agenda. Oh, we'll make a scapegoat out of Paul. We'll make him about to be a bad guy. Well, if you find my interview with, find the article by Bernadette Pager. There's a couple of other articles that are coming out, and watch the interviews on Unbreaking Science and watch the interviews of Paul and I everywhere. You'll see that all this guy was doing was following the law that he had to follow, both at the state and federal level. So let's have it out. Fine. You want his license? Suspend his license. See what becomes of you.
Yeah. So he follows the law, gets in trouble. He's not the one who initially wanted to do the study anyways. He was asked to do the study. So he follows the law and does the study for not himself, it was because he was asked to. And yet now he's being discredited. He's a pediatrician, so he can't.
Paul, that's the thing. Paul can't be discredited. He's vaccinating. He goes over the CDC schedule every time. He cannot be discredited. He says yes if they want to vaccinate. He never has refused anybody a vaccination, right? He doesn't scare them. He talks about rational things, right? So he's providing true informed consent. And the ethics board backed down on the basis of that argument. The medical board needs to wake up and realize that they have really made it much, much worse for themselves. They've made it much, much worse for them. They think that other physicians in the state of Oregon are going to go, oh, the medical board. Wait till the legislature in Oregon realizes that they don't have the power, that the medical board is overruling them. And that's a problem. Now, the governor might be interested in this, and might want to take the mandates away, take the exemptions away. Sorry, but that reflects on that person's character, right? There's a certain number of people in the population who cannot vaccinate. They have genetic risk. Do we really want to force them to vaccinate and harm their children for what? A small percentage increase in coverage? Look at the vaccine coverage in Oregon right now. It's fine. The overall vaccination coverage is fine. So what are they pushing for? They're pushing so that there's not an unvaccinated population, but it's too late. We already have the data. Because we already have the data, the jig is up. Okay, so ours is not the only study. There's another 6 studies that are coming out from other practices around the country. The cat's out of the bag, however you want to put it, right? Now, they can argue magic raisin. They can argue magic reason that my method is not any good. It's not proven. It's new, whatever. But in actuality, looking at the incidence of office visit is the general form of a method where you're just looking at incidence, because incidence is at least one office visit. So technically speaking, I know this is very technical speak, but it's very important. The RIOV method is just the general form of looking at rates with incidence. So there's nothing wrong with it. All observational studies are subject to any kinds of biases you don't know about. Anybody can think of any potential confounder. Imagining a confounder is not the same thing as testing for it, though. So imagined confounders do not debunk a study. You cannot debunk this study on the basis of saying, well, maybe there's magic raisins in the world. It doesn't work.
Has there been a study that you're aware of prior to this that was a really good study that has this been I guess attempted before, and if so, did it have some negative backlash also?
Yeah, well, there's three studies I'll mention. The first is the VSD study that was conducted by Thomas Verstraeten and his team, where they looked at the total exposure to vaccines and any neurodevelopmental disorder, and they found a linear relationship. And these data were presented at Simpsonwood Conference at a private meeting between government officials and pharma, which makes it illegal because you have to have the public there, right? And you've heard all about this. The Simpsonwood gathering, they were shocked at this. They realized it was real. The chair of the committee actually stepped out in the hallway to call his son-in-law because his daughter was about to give birth and say, I don't want my grandson to get any thimerosal-containing vaccines. Then they wrapped it, and they spent 4 years. They didn't tell the American public about the finding. They spent 4 years reanalyzing the data over and over again to make the association go away. There's an email from Thomas Verstraeten to the CDC saying, in the name of objectivity, in the name of science, we really have to accept this result. And the title of that email, the subject line, it just won't go away, it being the association. It's really clear we've got the smoking gun there of p-hacking. So CDC was guilty. This is when I say they're cheating. I'm not making it up. They were p-hacking the Verstraeten et al. Data away. It finally got published after they corrected for mother's age and mother's income. They corrected for the birth weight of the baby and the gestational age of the baby. All of these things are covariates that are, it's called multicollinearity. And if you start pulling out data and adjusting for this and adjusting for that until you get the result that you want and only publish the one result, that's cheating, that's fraud. That study should be retracted. There's no doubt about it. So that's one study that showed it, and it was robust, and so robust that he had to fight with the data. He had to strangle that data to death to make it go away. Okay. The other study is the Mawson study, which was a survey study. I'll mention that one. And he found increased risks of these things. Now, the problem with survey studies is if I'm a well-meaning anti-vaxxer mom, I might bias my results. As I figure I'm not part of a study, cool. Or if I'm a pro-vax mom, right, I might say, no, my kids have never been sick at all, so I might bias it either way. So that study is interesting. I think it was done as well as a survey study could be done under the circumstances. And then we have Neil Miller and Brian Hooker's study, where they had the data from 3 practices. And they found a limited subset of what we found in terms of increased association of health outcomes. We have the sickest population. The biggest study of all, of course, is the American population. The fourth one I'll mention is 54% of chronic illness in kids. That's the vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. They were less vaccinated in time, and now they're more vaccinated in time. However, there's a potential for temporal confounding. That's true for all these studies. We're all part of a big uncontrolled experiment. All of us getting vaccines. There's 54% chronic illness in the population of children, and under I think it's 24. They need pharmaceutical drugs for these conditions, and this is unprecedented in the history of mankind. So the vaccine experiment has failed human health. I think that the data are robust enough to say that we cannot come down and say vaccines are the greatest thing since sliced bread, that vaccines are safe and effective. What we can say is we have to do more studies, and that's what our study concludes. We have to do more vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and as I intimated earlier, there's 6 or 7 that are coming. So
so how do people keep up with these studies, your work, the Dr. Paul's story and his whole thing, what's going on, and how do they support, if they can support you guys?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to support. Paul has a legal defense fund, and that particular one, if you go to, I think it's Paul Thomas, Dr. Thomas Approved, or paulthomasapproved.com. Let me look that up.
Send me, I'll let the listeners know, if you're watching the video, it's in the show description. I'll put all the links, any links that you want in the show description, just send it over to me and I'll throw them in there, make sure they're included. Have you ever heard of the CT Freedom Alliance? Or We the Patriots USA? I became good friends with the founders, and Brian Festa and I
know those guys.
Yeah. They're in the same boat as you guys, always fighting against trying to deal with legal expenses and all these other things.
Well, yeah, this study was 100% paid for by donations to IPAK. So technically it's an IPAK study using Paul Thomas's data. And we're not done. We have more analyses ongoing. We're analyzing the data from the perspective of aluminum containing versus non-aluminum containing vaccines to see which ones, might contribute to more ill health. We're looking at live attenuated versus killed vaccines, right? So there's more science that's being done, and that those studies can be supported by a small monthly donation at IPAKnowledge.org. That's IPAK, IPAKnowledge.org. If you just look up my name, James Lyons-Weiler, and Vax versus Unvaxxed, you'll find plenty of information about it. You'll find the critics out there too. Read the criticisms. Read the magic raisin hypothesis and realize that anybody can imagine a confounder for any of these studies and just make it up in their head and say it must be that they put rose petals in their tea or something,
And check out, you did some great interviews with our mutual friend, Ernest Hancock, on Declare Your Independence. And then also, I know you've been on Spiro's, show, and I believe that video is still up on YouTube. People can check that out. And I believe Paul's also been on there too.
Yeah. There's a lot of interviews by Paul, a lot of interviews by me and other people talking about this. And there's going to be more. I mean, I really appreciate you having me on this, Ricky. And you can also follow me at jameslyonsweiler.com. I publish my blog there. And then my podcast is Unbreaking Science. So instead of fixing science like the CDC has put the fix in, it's Unbreaking Science. And we have a lot of interesting guests there too. But the most recent article I did that I want people to know about, and I'm really at the point right now where I don't publish fluff on my blog, is on this COVID-19 PCR false positive rates. I show the data of how often a PCR test has been shown by other scientists, not by me, and the rates range as high as 50%. So there's an 11% to 50%. And these are empirical field studies. And the people in public health are telling the public, and they're telling people like judges in courtrooms while they're under oath, that PCR testing has 0% false positives. And that's absolutely incorrect. So that's a very, very important thing. If your businesses are shut down,
it's considered the gold standard. And no,
it's not. It's not. Sanger sequencing is the gold standard. Nobody has ever considered PCR the gold standard.
Well, I've heard people that I've talked to, they're like, oh, the PCR test is, I tested positive with the PCR test. It's the gold standard. I'm like, the gold standard? I'm like, you do realize, like, you could find, if your neighbor had COVID, if they ran it enough cycles, they could probably, you could probably come up positive on it. I'm like, people just aren't even aware of what it is. I mean, and even the founder and the things he said, about Dr. Fauci.
Carrie Mullis, yeah. So this article, it's called Follow the Science, Not Mere Authority on COVID-19 False Positive Rates, goes through deep point by point by point why asymptomatic transmission is more likely than not just false positives, right? It's more likely than not just false positives. You're seeing, oh, this person's asymptomatic and they test positive. The people that appear to get COVID-19, some of them after they've already recovered, the reinfection, probably false positives. I mean, it puts it all together.
There's people testing again for COVID, and all this stuff, none of it makes any sense. The fact that all this, you can look at all this evidence of either fuckery, for a lack of a better term. Of course, I have you here to sound smart. I'm going to kind of dumb it down for myself and everybody else. But
that's one of my favorite words. I have to watch myself when I'm online because I get so upset.
Yeah, but it's just like there's so much evidence of lying, deceiving, being wrong, predictions being wrong or off. It's like, how much more evidence do people need? But I think it shows the power of fear. I mean, you scare people. I mean, I talked to libertarians during the lockdown who are small government, like, just people that would not be for mandating masks or a lockdown or shutdown. And they're like, yeah, but I have this health issue, or my wife has this health issue, or my grandparents, and it's just like, damn. I mean, it's amazing how it was one of those things where the what if was so scary, right? Like you planted the seed of doubt where you had so much conflicting information, and because every time there was something that was kind of debunking the mainstream narrative, you would kind of fight back and say that that was debunked, and that people were just like throwing their hands up and be like, well, I don't know what to believe, and if I'm wrong, what the TV's telling me, it could mean my life. Or
That's what that's exactly the agenda. So when mask, don't mask, 6 feet, 9 feet, no 6 feet, right? CDC said 20 layers is the same as N95, and then they said 16, and then they said 1. Well, maybe if you just imagine yourself wearing your mask, that's good enough. You know, just come up with something.
Right?
The whole point is, if you confuse the population to the point where they give up, they just stop thinking, then you can tell them what to think. They're looking for someone to tell them what to think, right? And so that's why, again, I'm teaching people. I have a whole segment, a whole series of courses on the analytics, right? So far we had spreadsheets 1. That's spreadsheets 1, just how to get data into spreadsheets for yourself and see what the numbers say. And it's an uphill battle for some people, but if you ever wanted to learn some spreadsheets, that course is available. It's not open right now because I like to do them live, but we're going to get to the point where we're teaching formal logic. Imagine if we could teach 200,000 American citizens formal logic, something they would potentially have gotten at college. These are college level courses for people that will never go to college and never care if they go to college. They don't care about a college degree. And the fee's like $160 a course. So we're going to set the American public and anybody around the world that takes these courses on fire with the ability to think their way out of a paper bag. So that listen, I got overwhelmed with this whiplash psychology of do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. You try it on a kid sometime if you want to be really cruel. You know, you're supposed to stand up, now sit down, stand up, sit down, put it on your knees. You know, they just, you shut down. After a while, you shut down, and
Yeah,
you have to think.
and again, when being wrong could mean, you scare them by making them believe that if you're wrong, if you don't believe me, it's the same thing with the vaccine thing. With if you're a young parent, this pediatrician's telling you like, hey, your kid's in danger, if you don't vaccinate them, just that planting that seed of fear of like, oh my God, like, okay, this isn't just a typical debate about, which soccer team's the best or won the most champion leagues, or is Tom Brady, how many yards did he throw this year? It's like, if I'm wrong, nobody gets hurt. But if I'm wrong about this, the fact that you're scaring me into believing it could mean somebody's life or health, like, oh my God, so, and that power is just beyond any other, power. Like it just, I think it made people just not think rationally and be so afraid of being wrong, because like I said, it could mean their lives or the lives of a loved one, that they're like, you know what, I'd rather just go along with it and then stay on the safe side. But the problem with that is that it's a slippery slope where it's just like, okay, we accept this, a 2-week lockdown, and then it's like, oh well, now they're saying maybe a month, and maybe be 6 feet away from people. If you can't be 6 feet away from people, now start wearing a mask. Oh, now just wear a mask all the time. Wear one when you're in public, and wear one when you're taking a shower. It's
Ricky, the purpose of gaslighting is compliance.
Yes, absolutely.
The purpose of gaslighting is compliance. So the way to, of course, respond to gaslighting is to kick the motherfucker out of the house. Okay.
Let's end it with a swear. Yes, finally, we got you to swear.
Right? Because think about it. Gaslighting, narcissistic men gaslight their women. And the answer to a narcissistic man in your life is to kick the motherfucker out of the house. So we got to kick these motherfuckers out of the house. How do we do that? We do that with plan B. We build the alternative. We want science. This is the vaccine risk aware community is not only growing, but it's also the most science inquisitive community that we have in America by far. There are people going right now for their degrees in science who put less work into actually studying scientific studies. They want it by the book, they want it from the lecture, but to actually read a scientific study, that's one of the courses that we teach, how to read and interpret a scientific study. And it's just it gives you the landmark, it gives you the roadmap to how to get into a study and how to understand it. And the website again is IPAK-edu.org. This is a great endeavor to try to, challenge everybody to be your best you and put your best, I say, get your game on, get your brain on, Okay.
Yeah.
Time to get your brain on.
Yeah, and the other thing too, what's really interesting, speaking of science and thinking logically, is that you talk to somebody who is pro vaccines and you get into any actual depth in the conversation and you start talking about the science, you start talking about what's in the vaccines, you start talking about the VARs, or VAERS, however you pronounce it, where
Bears, yeah.
yeah, VAERS. You start talking about any of these things about the liability of the vaccine manufacturers. Like, you talk about all this, you realize, like, oh, that they're not aware of any of this. They're not informed at all. You talk to somebody who's skeptical about vaccines, they actually know their shit. So what's bothersome is that people group, anti-vaxxers or people who are vaccine skeptical, or even like myself, who I'm like, you know what, do what you want. I just want you to have all the information and come up with your own logical conclusion on what you think is more of a, puts your child more at risk, either getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine. So I'm pro information. And you talk to somebody who's on that side or on our side, then you're going to find out real quickly that they didn't just watch some conspiracy theory documentary and then, just believe that, some crazy thing that vaccines could cause harm. They did some actual research. And I think the most frustrating part about having these discussions at times is that a lot of people who are pushing back, or a lot of people who are so quickly to say, hey, you're a conspiracy theorist, or that's been debunked, or the science has been settled. The second you start talking about science, or you start talking about, the actual vaccine, that's where their knowledge ends. And it's like, it boggles my mind, because those are the people who are on the other side pushing so passionately for vaccines, and yet they're just so uninformed. And
They are uninformed, and part of what's happening, in my view, is that in their push to protect themselves from the overreach, right? They're not listening either. And what I mean by that is they're better positioned if they really relax for a moment and listen to what the other side says sometimes. For instance, the information on the variants in the virus. Well, will the vaccine protect or not? Well, Fauci says, as soon as Fauci says something that's on our side, on the side, supports one of our positions. Oh yes, Fauci says, right? Even though we mean it in a smart-ass kind of way, even Fauci says, right? But in reality, there's details there that matter, right? If the vaccine fails against any of these variants, they're going to update the vaccine. But what comes next after that? It means that if you were vaccinated against SARS-CoV-2, the mothership one, the predominant one, are you then going to have to be vaccinated again in 6 months' time, or in a year's time, to one that's different? And what's the effect of that on the human immune system? Is through antigenic shifting? Are these people then going to be, having a really bad reaction to either the vaccine or another coronavirus infection that comes around the corner, because they were vaccinated twice, once against this one and once against this one, and the third variant? It's a rat's nest, okay? And we have to listen to what they're saying when they say things like, oh, we stabilized the protein. The protein's in there and it's stabilized, but you get a much better immune reaction if you use just the S1 product before it actually folds into the whole spike protein. There's a lot of molecular detail there, but understand that they're trying out a lot of different configurations, and the different vaccines all across the board are approaching it in different ways, which means that you have this heterogeneous landscape of vaccine immunity. Some people are immune this way, and some people are immune that way. And then the virus is actually in this heterogeneous environment trying to find the niche where it can actually survive in all of these different immunological milieu, all these, right? And what that means is that we're going to see a diversification. This virus is going to, listen, the mutations, we know the mutations are going to cause vaccine escape. That's not controversial. But we also know that 8.5% of the mutations in all the variants that are known map to known primer sites for the test. Now, if 8.5% map to known primer sites and the genome is 29,000 bases long, That means that there's a massive selection for variants that can escape the PCR test. So PCR test, I'm predicting right here and right now, PCR test is doomed. That testing program is doomed. It cannot sustain itself, because what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, well, we just need to have 2 tests, and that will increase the, if in case, well, no, we'll have 3 tests. And now we've got 3 tests and 4 body sites. We're going to do your tears and your eyes and your anus. We're going to do it all right. It just becomes untenable, and it's intractable. And they'll realize that we just have to sequence everybody, which is what Singhang Li has been saying for months and months and months, and is currently in Dr. Singhang Li from Milford, Connecticut. He's currently in a battle with the FDA to get them to bend and to say, yes, you're right, we need to allow sequencing to be clinical. The Biden administration just put in, right, their incentive package, or whatever they call it, the bailout package. They're going to bail out reality in a huge money, a shit ton of money for sequencing of COVID-19 in the United States. We haven't done any of it. When that comes online, we're going to find tons of variants that have escaped the test. Tons of variants that people are walking around, they've got the infection, they're asymptomatic. That means huge numbers of people are already immune, more than 33%. But it also means that some people that are testing negative should be given a COVID-19 diagnosis. And therein lies the conundrum. If we don't listen to the other side and say, why do you have that CT score way out here? We have it out here because we know we're not getting all the variants. Then tell us that. Don't try to say that the false positive rate is 0. It's not. You're missing it too. And you tried the CT thing, and it's flawed. You can't get false positive 0 even at high CT. You're just getting a false positive everybody at high CT. What you're trying to do is make sure you don't miss anybody by putting the CT way out here. So they're confused. They don't understand what they're doing with testing. PCR testing is doomed. We're more powerful if we actually pay attention to what they're saying and not get a visceral. You cannot afford a visceral reaction. You want to throw something at your TV. Uncle Jack's telling you, put it down, put the remote down. Pause. Most of us watch YouTube now, nothing live, right? Or video. Take a deep breath. Rewind. Slow down and listen to it again, because what you should listen with the ear of what is this information? Why is it valuable to me? Not this information. Oh my God, they're misleading the public. We already know that. That's part of it. It's like, oh my God, Germany invaded Poland in 1945. Right? You're going to complain about that in 1945? No, you're kind of solving the wrong problem there. So, take it easy and just learn as much as you can about what they're saying, and try to let it in and try to sort it out. You might not have all the answers, but you can certainly generate some questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. So much information. I'm sure for some listeners, there might be information overload. So listen to it more than one time. And then definitely check out your podcast. It was Unbreaking Science, right?
That's right. Yeah, you can find us at WWDNYK Studios. That stands for What We Do Not Yet Know. WWDNYK Studios.
Awesome. And then I'll put links to that and everything else in the show description. Hopefully we keep in touch, and good luck with everything. I hear that Dr. Paul is one of the nicest people you've ever met. So we wish him well for many reasons. So
he's a real sweetheart. I mean, he's got so many videos on YouTube of him pulling earwax out of kids' ears and things like that. He's just a fun guy. And I have a beautiful, beautiful interview coming up with him soon, I hope, about Dr. Paul the man. Not a thing about vaccines, just Dr. Paul the man, who he really is. He's just one of the nicest guys ever.
Which I think can be beneficial, because a lot of times, the media will do a great job of just making somebody seem scary or crazy or discrediting them, so you don't even look into it. So I think showing who somebody is as a person, and that's why I love these long form discussions, because I think people, if you just came on and you just said, hey, I was a part of this vax versus anti-vax study, that's it, see you later, let me just tell you a little bit about it. But when people get to hear a little bit of your backstory, some of your perspectives, opinions, like I always say, you can probably pretend to be somebody else for like 15, 20 minutes, but once you get to an hour, 2 hours, like, who you are is who you are, and it's gonna, and people can kind of see that. And I think people really appreciate, sincere people who really have their heart in the right place. And that's definitely the case with this story and your fight. So hopefully this will all help, and we help promote what's going on, and promote your work, and hopefully we keep in touch.
We absolutely will, Ricky. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to check out your other podcasts and see what you've been up to. You mentioned quite a number of interesting things, and I've got some time on my hands while I do the data analysis. So
Yeah,
I'll be checking you out too.
I've had a lot of people on this topic. It's something that I'm really passionate about as a parent. It makes me more passionate about it. But I've always been in diet and nutrition and health, and always had this very much a dislike for big pharma. And I always felt like your best fight for your best way to fight any disease is your immune system. Start there first. Make your body healthy and strong. And also, these topics are important because you can't go out and enjoy life to its fullest and be the best parent, the best husband, the best boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever, or just go out and enjoy whatever limited time we have on this earth if you don't have health. So I think health, that's one of the reasons why I think health related subjects and topics for this podcast are so dear and near to my heart, because it's stuff that people can hear and actually implement immediately, and change your life, hopefully for the better, immediately. So
you're doing important work, and you're a good man. So keep it up.
I try. We're all doing our part. That's why I called it the ripple effect. I'm just starting my own little ripple and helping other people, create their own ripples. And like I always say, I'm an idiot. I'm just a conduit for people like yourself who actually understand the science and are doing this important stuff. But if I can do my part in exposing all these really interesting people like yourself, then then I feel like I'm helping. So.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk with you again real soon and have you on ours. And I want to know about Ricky too. So.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thanks, James. Hey, take care. Enjoy the rest of the night. And thank you for taking so much time out of your day to chat.
It's my pleasure. It's important to get the word out there. And, I'm eternally grateful for your help. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
You too.